So let's talk through the points changes to the other Imperial factions, and to be honest, in terms of power level, it's not entirely good news for them. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy-focused 40k channel, where today I thought we'd talk through the state of a fair few Imperial factions, the ones that we haven't talked about yet since chapter approved, and how the points changes might impact them going forwards. For the Imperium so far in chapter approved, we've covered Custodes, Space Marines and Guard. The Custodes basically got a massive set of buffs, particularly helping out their bikes and Terminators among other things. The Space Marines got a fairly hefty nerf to their best gun dreadnoughts, some slightly cheaper gladiator tanks, and a fair few faction-specific buffs for a few iconic units like Death Company or Wolfen. The Guard got a small nerf to their Manticores, but better Leman Russes. But for the other Imperial factions, it does seem that Grey Knights, Sisters and Imperial Knights are all a little bit weaker than they were after these points changes, with a few points increases to certain units. We'll talk through each of the armies in that order, what exactly has changed, and how I think it might affect their lists going forward. First up, we'll start with Grey Knights, who I must admit I think have got some pretty reasonable changes in this update. Overall, I think it is largely a nerf, but seeing as Grey Knights have been one of the top factions in the game for the past few months, I think having their strongest datasheets reined in a little bit is no bad thing, and I think that the internal balance within the codex is a fair bit better after the changes. First up, perhaps the most obviously undercosted datasheet in the book, the Dread Knight and the Grandmaster Dread Knight both went up 10 points. Once you've included the most typical gear of sword silencer and psi cannon, that's usually around about a 5% increase. A lot of people do like to take teleporters on top of that, of course. I feel like as nerfs go, this wasn't overly punishing. I think Grey Knights do need their Dread Knights to be good. They're one of the units that's going to be doing the most heavy lifting in the codex after all. But they really were just very, very cheap for what they did before. A model that's both fast, tough, and has some decent threat both in the psychic phase, shooting phase, and in melee. The standard ones are core units. The Grandmasters can deploy all sorts of nasty tricks from the wisdoms of the prognosticars, and I feel that Games Workshop might even have gone a little bit harsher than this, but I don't think 10 points is really all that bad a change. Basically nerf it a small amount. If it still remains a problem, they can always nerf it more if they feel like it. After this, I still think that Dread Knights are really good. They're still going to get played in multiples in Grey Knight army lists. It's usually just going to be a 40-point tax on Grey Knight armies compared with other factions. Of course, this goes hand in hand with Grey Knights not being able to take multiple Brotherhoods in competitive play, and therefore not being able to take multiple Grandmasters due to that. So in general, Grey Knights are just going to get spammed a little bit less than they were before. Otherwise, Interceptors have also gone up by 2 points per model, now 26 points rather than 24, a plus 8% increase, and again I do feel that that's a fairly reasonable change. For only a couple of points more than Strike Marines, I did feel that these guys were just insanely better for the points. Massively longer threat range combined with a teleport shunt was just really nice to have. Hammer Hand really gives you a whole load of melee might, but that's not necessarily going to be the best thing if you can't get that melee might where it actually needs to be and make the charges. I think it shows they were a little bit on the cheap side due to people taking 30 of them in lots of competitive lists. Now they feel a bit more balanced against the strikes. Maybe you'll want some of them, but not 30 of them. It isn't all bad news for Grey Knights though. The Paladins have gone down to 45 points from 47, and the Terminators down to 40 from 42, both of which I think are really sensible. Just on their numbers alone, they were kind of easy to see why they were overlooked compared with Strike Squads or Interceptors. It was kind of a shame for perhaps one of the most iconic Grey Knights units. I'm still not convinced they're quite as strong as Strike Squads right now, but including a unit of them and building around them is far less of a bad strategy, and I don't think that people will feel quite like they're harming their list quite as much by including Terminators as they were before. Overall, I'd certainly say it's a nerf to the Grey Knights, but that's not really the worst thing for one of the top factions in the game. I think they're still overall looking strong, better internally balanced, and the worst excesses of their spam in 6 Dread Knight lists, they're a thing of the past due to the detachment changes. Next up we come to the Sisters of Battle, and I feel like Games Workshop have done a very similar thing to them. Nerfs to a fair amount of fairly competitive options, and some buffs to their lesser seen but really quite pretty tanks. Morven Val has gone up 15 points, up 6% to 280 points now. Not really too hard to see why. She's a fairly spectacular faction leader with the massive reroll buffs she can give a unit, and particularly with powerful bodyguard rules being around, she was kind of hard not to include in a lot of lists. Still remains good, I think. I think the points nerf won't hurt that too much, but maybe a little bit less mandatory than she was. Perhaps the single nerf from this change though comes to the Celestian Sacrosancts, the bodyguards themselves. They're up to 16 points from 14, a fairly hefty plus 14% in points cost. and I think this is genuinely going to see them having less play. I feel, to be honest, that Celestian Sacrosancts might be one of the units that are played a lot, not really because of their points cost and how much damage they do, but just because of that powerful bodyguard rule, where they can essentially remain out of line of sight while protecting some really threatening sisters characters like Val and Celestine, and often allowing them to do quite gamey things that stretch out to objectives, while making them impossible to shift. I feel that at this new points cost, you'll get far less people actually running them to be melee threats in their own right, which I think they could do fairly well at the moment, but perhaps now being only able to justify them if you're actually going to be abusing that bodyguard rule and providing that character protection, where say a 20-point increase on a big unit of 10 isn't necessarily going to stop you taking them for that role. I feel that if Games Workshop really wants to fix these properly, it's probably going to be best off altering the bodyguard rule itself, maybe in some sort of mechanic to actually make them take damage when you target the character, rather than the fairly common you can see me but you can't shoot me situation that sisters can put them in. Next up, and to be honest in a slightly more surprising change, is a 2-point nerf to Dominions. They've gone up to 14 points from 12, so if you were taking them for that stratagem with the Stormbolters, a unit of 4 with 4 of those Stormbolters will cost you 90 points rather than 80, a 13% points increase. I do think Dominions are really quite good, just maybe pigeonholed into one exact role, scouting forward in rhinos, then jumping out to unleash a whole load of mortal wounds. I can't help but think it might have been a better idea to put the small points increase on the Stormbolters maybe. I think in reality maybe they should cost a little bit more if they've got that great stratagem, something like 7 or 8 points each, though of course Games Workshop likes to lock themselves only into multiples of 5 for war gear, and 10 points per Stormbolter would be far too much. Again, I sort of feel that this nerf to the base cost of the Dominions, maybe it makes other loadouts not very tempting, so not so great if you're using Dominions with maybe melter guns or flamers perhaps. Next up, there's an increase to the Retributor Armorium Cherubs. Their points are increased from 5 to 10. These ones are the upgrade that allow you to pick one heavy weapon and fire it again, and now say if you were running a squad with quad multi-melters and 2 cherubs, that would have gone up to 160 points from 150. I kind of feel like this isn't the worst change in the world, to be honest. There certainly wasn't really much decision as to whether or not you'd actually take an Armorium Cherub. It was basically an auto-include at 5 points for a massive amount of extra heavy weapon fire. And even better than that, as you could choose to use it after the unit is shot, you could use it to either finish off an injured enemy unit or try and shoot something new. I think they still seem very usable indeed at 10 points per model, though it is a small overall nerf to the Retributor squad, who are now going to be even more glass cannony than ever, with a lot of points invested in very fragile bodies. Finally, on the positive side for the sisters, all the tank chassis went down a little bit. The Castigator, Exorcist and Immolator all dropped by 10 points. I think all of these are quite nice changes, to be honest. In terms of firepower efficiency, none of these are really all that strong. It's just kind of hard to compete with core choices, like the Retributors, and I still think that that's likely going to be the case. I feel that the tanks are a little bit better than they were before, but still might need to drop another 10 points each to really get good. I feel the Immolator, however, though, might well interest people. I have seen a few people using a single multi-melter one in a few lists when you needed a transport and you wanted some more guns on a rhino. Certainly can be a way of delivering some fast melter death on a fairly mobile chassis, and it's certainly a better choice than it was before. Finally for buffs, and a change that I absolutely did see coming, was those painfully overcosted Paragon Warsuits dropping down 10 points each. It's now 210 points for a base squad now, or 240 with the multi-melters. Definitely a decent points drop in the right direction. I'm sure there's a fair few people who bought the new shiny plastic who want a better excuse to play it in game. I feel like they just might still be a bit of a hard unit to use at that points cost. They can absolutely deal some massive damage in the right situation between strong shooting, melee and core, but even with this points drop are still kind of fragile with no invul save, and the amount of high strength, high damage weapons going around in 40k at the moment. Overall, again with the Grey Knights, I'd say that it's a small nerf for the Sisters of Battle, a little bit better internal balance, and still an army with a lot of strong options though. I feel as factions go, there may be an army that didn't need the nerf quite as much as Grey Knights did. I feel before the changes they were kind of borderline top tier, and these changes might make them look a little bit more middle of the pack. Finally we come to the Imperial Knights, where like the Chaos ones there's just the 2 changes. The very shooty Armiger Moiraxes with the Lightning Locks and Volkite Vuglares are going up 5 points each per gun, so if you had an Armiger armed with 2 it's now up to 165 over 155. A plus 6% points increase. I describe it as a small but noticeable nerf. These things certainly were effective firepower for the cost, and I think that more people tended to run them than the Armiger Helverins with the autocannons. They were just perhaps a little bit more generalist in profile. I think Games Workshop often tends to hand out nerfs whenever you see people running entire armies of just one thing at tournaments, and just with having fairly generalist firepower, good mobility and good objective scoring, these were certainly a unit that you could spam. Overall they still seem usable, but as they're one of the stronger Imperial Knights units, definitely a small and unhelpful change to a faction that I'd describe as around mid-tier at best, and still waiting for its 9th edition codex. It's kind of a similar story for the Questor Megara as well. After the big Knights, it was a Forge World 1 that was pretty much the best all-rounder right now. The Siege Claw was amazing in melee, it's got kind of okay generalist firepower at range, and perhaps nicest of all gets an invul save in close combat that you can use rotate ion shields on to get to a nice 4-up save. Again, like the Moiraxes, I still think they remain pretty decent. He's gone up to 500 points from 480, so a fairly small nerf percentage wise. But again, with Imperial Knight lists, there's really not often all that much wiggle room points wise, and it could make a few annoying choices for people who already have one in their list. I guess it might lead to a little bit more play of the other Questor variants, or maybe the Questor Styrex, basically a very similar version to the Megara, but some slightly inferior firepower in my opinion. Maybe a 20-point differential might see some people swapping over to that. Overall though, taken in context of recent months, Knights aren't in as bad place as they were at the start of 9th. They did gain a helpful secondary option in the new chapter approved, and more importantly those objective secured changes from the balanced datasheet the other month certainly has them performing far better than they have been doing in 9th so far. They're not really in a terrible place, though I'm not convinced that this was really a change that they needed. So overall it does seem to be more nerfs than buffs for these Imperial Codexes. Certainly going to be a few small shake-ups to the most competitive lists for them. It'll be interesting to see where people go with these in the context of all the other armies coming out and having to adapt to the new missions and army formation rules. Let me know what you think of the points alterations down in the comments below. Always interested to hear the perspectives of generals from these factions. Has it changed any units that you're going to be taking? If you've enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where we'll keep the regular 40k content coming. I tend to have new videos coming out just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention one way in which you can help support Auspex Tactics, and that's my Element Games affiliate link down in the video description. Element Games is a UK-based discount retailer. They usually give 10 to 20% off Games Workshop's miniatures, and if you order anything after clicking the link in the video description, a small amount goes to help support Auspex Tactics without costing you any more whatsoever. Can just be a way to help support if you were thinking about ordering in some models anyway. For people over in the USA, I do also have an Amazon link down there as well. Again, that one works in much the same way. Click the link, order anything through it, and a small amount goes to help support the channel. Again, can be a way to help out if you were getting something from there anyway. A massive thank you to you guys who have been using those, and a great big thank you for listening to all of you. I'll hope to see you guys next time.